G'day, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. Welcome to the Dropped Kickoff for another week. Absolutely nothing has happened. No, we tell a lie, we joke. The big news, of course, is that the Melbourne Rebels will no longer participate in Super Rugby Pacific from 2025 onwards. So we're going to sit down and have a quick discussion about this, talk about exactly what the hell has unraveled over the course of today. And I am joined by, of course, Nick Hartman, by Nathan Williamson, and we've also got our resident Melburnian Dylan Langes here. We're not even going to do introductions. We need to just jump straight into what the hell happened, because quite a lot has happened from months and months of speculation to all of a sudden, here we are, here is what's happening. Nathan, I know you're probably on the side of a road talking about this, but what the hell happened today?
Yeah, it all sort of kind of exploded at once, didn't it? Basically, for background, Rugby Australia has been in chats with a consortium and take over the Rebels. I think led by Lee Clifford, I think former Qantas chairman, a couple others in the business ventures. And basically what happened was that Rugby Australia put out a statement today basically saying it's been unsuccessful on account of, multiple sort of factors that included sort of the belief that there are still multiple people involved in the consortium that were ex-Rebels directors. The fact that I think the consortium was looking for a payout of several $7 million to help sort of fund it, and also the sort of viability of moving it out to this sort of Western Melbourne group and playing it at the sort of new stadium there. So the call got made that from sort of Super Rugby in a Super Rugby Pacific perspective, next year there won't be a Rebel side. Like they still sort of try to reassure there's going to be support for the pathways and the potential for Rebels involvement in Super Rugby W next year. But yeah, ultimately a pretty sad day for the Rebels and sort of Super Rugby Pacific competition.
Sad day is an understatement. I think 14 years that club has been around, and also making a little bit of history, making its inaugural Super Rugby finals appearance. It is locked in. They are definitely going to appear in the finals, regardless of the result this weekend in Fiji. But at the same time, absolutely brutal. Finding out at 10 a.m. they were literally hopping on a flight to Fiji at 11:45, or checking in for a flight at 11:45. Dylan, you're on the ground. I know that you've been well spoken about all of the issues and stuff happening out of Melbourne. Thoughts, feelings? How do we feel about all of this news? Not just the fact that the Rebels are getting cut, but also all the other stuff around the pathways and discussions, particularly about the fact that.
Look, it's a pretty shitty thing to do, like the week heading into finals, don't you think? They're flying out, as you said. They're making the maiden. They've made the finals for the first time, but they're just flying out to Fiji. Like, why did it need to get announced today? We've seen this in the past, back in 2017, with the whole you got 48 to 72 hours, and then they dragged out for 10 years. We talk about player welfare, but that's disgusting. And coming from a CEO who's an ex-player, he'll never be as good as George Smith, but even if he wants to be, like, that's not okay. That's, to me, is not okay. And I think I've got so many thoughts and feelings, Nick. You've seen my little rants on Twitter. I freestyle wrote an open angry letter that probably a good thing I don't post online. Surprisingly, not as many explicitives as I thought there'd be. Yeah.
Just sheer rage. I think it's kind of like that's kind of the feeling and the vibe around it, I think, is the best way to describe it. But there is so much going on here. I think it sounds to me like that RA, I mean, it's not been public knowledge, but it sounds to me like RA had basically made up their mind that this was going to happen. And that probably the consortium, whatever sort of information that they'd been hearing from the consortium, it probably was like, well, no, we're going to press the button now. So if you press the button now, they know now. But I mean, the fact that they're about to fly out to Fiji, I mean, it looks awful from an optics perspective, even though if the moment they make a decision, the hardest thing you can possibly do would be to keep it under wraps until the following week. But I mean, I know that they were probably going to announce it in the next couple of weeks, which probably might have even been worse, considering the Rebels would have actually been in the finals campaign and might have had a really good run and still be firing. It's a difficult one.
It's an awkward position to be in the meme finals, right? Yeah. In terms of like sorry to interrupt, but just sort of a bit of context. It's tough to find a good spot for stuff like this. And yeah, it's brutal. It's brutal to sort of find out as you're about to go to Fiji and play a really important game. But yeah, I think it also has to do something to do with the sort of 60 days, that period as well of when the consortium won that sort of extension. Like, I think without that, if that sort of wasn't granted by the sort of committee that was overseeing that, you would have had this decision a lot earlier. But yeah, it's an interesting situation to be in, and you know, again, credit to the players and coaches who have come out and basically said, no, like we're keen to sort of, this is going to galvanise us, this is going to sort of make us stronger, and we're really keen to sort of go out with a bang here.
What was the meme you were talking about, Dylan?
Oh, the one that you like to share on Twitter. He's too dangerous to keep alive after they with Mace Windu.
Yeah.
The
Star Wars makes one finals campaign, and it's too dangerous to be kept alive.
Yeah, between Star Wars and Simpsons memes.
If there's one person, yeah, I know, it's the reality of it. You're always guaranteed a good Star Wars meme and a good Simpsons meme. If there's one person though who I always love hearing the opinion of when it comes to business decisions and being savvy, though, it is Nick Hartman. Nick, what are your thoughts on this whole situation regarding, you know, announcing it now, fucking it up, and do we move the Rebels to Western Sydney?
I don't know whether to take that as a compliment or as a backhanded one, there, Nick. But I guess thank you. Yeah, it sucks, but you have to announce it sometime. Rugby is not good at being transparent or talking. Being transparent, I don't mean, you know, we need to see everything, but I heard Victorian say, you know, it's just, you compare how the CEOs behave in public in NRL and AFL, just being from two big sporting organizations compared to Phil War. I don't think this needed to happen like this. I'm not really sure why they couldn't have just really worked hard to, hey, let's just deal with this in the off season. There's plenty of time, the Super Rugby off season, probably like 6 months, off the top of my head. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, it sucks, but it sucks anyway. I don't know, Nick, if you want to launch into whose fault is it next, because the answer is the Melbourne Rebels board. Yeah, I don't know. Like, it sucks, but you got to do it sometime. And I feel for Dylan, and I feel for all the Victorian rugby community. It's gut punch. I don't feel as hurt as a rugby fan today because we went through all the Force fiasco, and that was a lot worse, even though the outcome was the same. So yeah, it sucks, but you know, like, what can you do?
I think the important thing you just said there, Nick, though, is that it's the board, and everyone talks about this transparency. And I saw all of the, you know, thoughts and prayers, and you know, it's a tough day on Twitter, but at the end of the day, it's the board. The board's actions are what caused this. Like, we can sit here and blame government funding, we can blame Rugby Australia, and I've got no love for Rugby Australia, but there's just wasting money. And to find out, I didn't know that, I was all excited about this consortium, and then to find out that you've got members of the board that fucked the Rebels are trying to be a part of this consortium. Like how dare you? Where is your honor and dignity that says, I fucked this, I'm going to walk away? Like, I know in certain businesses, restaurants and whatnot, if you try it, doesn't work, okay, maybe we'll give it a rebrand, we'll, you know, call it a different thing, find a new chef, but that's not this. You've been pissing money away, you've been selling a broken product, and you think it's just okay to start a new consortium or join a new consortium to fuck it in Western Melbourne. Like, that's so bad. And you know, yes, I'm really sad for the players. Like, I have a friend of mine, she plays in the women's team. She's been having a really shitty day. Like, she doesn't know what her future's going to be. I'm sure there are plenty of young players in that squad that aren't your marquee players that are going, do I need to find a new job? Is there an opportunity for me to play rugby? And that's really tough. But there are a lot of people at that organisation that should not sleep well tonight, and they should feel the pain of everyone's suffering. And, these messages of, our thoughts are with the Victorian community and thanks for our members. Like, you haven't done anything different. I was thinking about today, like how many times I filled out those member engagement surveys. Nothing changed. The only thing that changed that I filled out on that form was they got rid of the fucking cheerleaders. So that to me is one of those letdowns that they've had. They haven't tried to grow. They haven't tried to expand. I think they've done more damage to Victorian rugby in the long run over the last few years. But they don't want to take accountability, and now they want to sue. Oh my God! Just please go back to your hole and leave rugby alone.
Yeah, it's one of those things, particularly when you start dealing with the type of debt that they accrued. Like, it's the old Al Capone, like, one of the most famous gangsters in the world, got away with so much sort of different levels of high-level crime, yet as soon as he went for tax evasion, they got him. Like, this is the type of stuff you don't mess around with. And the fact that they were able to sort of get to the stage, and if comes out true that they were sort of working for years insolvent, like, that's very serious repercussions there. And the fact that they were able to sort of keep it under the carpet and, still sort of put together, it's one of those, the cynic in me doesn't want to sort of believe it, but that, is it a coincidence that this is the final year and they've been able to build such a big roster when, more money might have been going into it and they might have been spending beyond their means? Like, I don't want to think that, but when you start looking at sort of costs like this, it's a tough one to not sort of consider. So there's blame all around this. Every single party involved in this has some level of sort of accountability when it comes to the situation. But yeah, if you're now, and as you said, if you're not part of a consortium whose the option is now, we're going to go sue, like, are you really acting in the best interest of the game, or are you acting in the best interest of maybe sort of past directors or people you might have sort of connections with that are directors as part of this consortium?
Yeah, it's a fair question, and it also is it just all about money?
Can I just ask the question, Nick? Sorry, to the general public, because I don't think anyone here has the knowledge, but I do want to know, like, what is the actual kind of legality, or is it a civil offence? Is it a criminal offence to trade while insolvent, and what's the magnitude of it? I don't know if anyone listens and can let us know. I'm really curious, because if they have been trading while insolvent since, what was it, 2018 or something?
December 2018. December 2018.
That's 6 years. I know they stopped. You could do it during COVID, but just that's crazy. And it's 22 million in debt. Anyway, I'm just curious. Sorry to interrupt. I'm just really curious to how big that offence is.
We probably have to look it up. There would be, you'd have to find it out somewhere. Look, it will throw that question out onto Twitter. But I did see a number that came through like earlier today. I saw apparently the Rebels over the course of their entire existence have spent upwards of $54 million, otherwise burning through at least 10 grand a day to keep that.
That's $6 million less a year than the PNG Rugby League team.
Well, no, that's 600 million. That's what they're getting. God, they couldn't have timed that any worse at all. But I mean, it like a question here, impact or the actual impact on the game. I mean, the question around like what could they have done better, which is I know that it was a question to ask, but I mean, I feel like it's just a kind of a question that is we have no control over that per se, because it's a different time, different place. But Dylan, what sort of impact does this actually have on Victorian rugby? I mean, I know that they've at least said that they're going to try and commit to all of the pathways that have already been talked about. They emphasized that it was the men's team that was going to be insolvent. So for all we know, the Super Rugby women's program will continue. And I know that there's a lot more grounds to keep that running, seeing as the vast majority of those players play all of their rugby in Victoria. So how much does this actually impact clubland in Victoria?
I mean, I think they've devalued clubland for a long time now. when you look at that spending, think about the cost of recruiting all these players out of Queensland, only to send them back up to play club rugby in Queensland. You know, I don't know what a base contract for some of these guys are, what they would be getting paid, but I'd wager, having done some EBA work, that and enterprise agreements, that they'd have their fares covered to fly up. They'd have some travel allowances. They'd have their accommodations paid for, all that stuff. That's a huge cost. And how many of them have ever actually played more than a match for the Rebel, like more than 80 minutes? Barely any. I don't. If someone can correct me, that'd be great. But so, you know, you talk pathways, Nick, and I go, what the fuck's the point? We see, like, how many people have genuinely come out of the Victorian pathways. And I'm not talking someone who played juniors and then went up and played Shoot Shield, or up in Brisbane and then got recruited back to the Rebels, like has genuinely been recruited out of the Jewish Shield. I can think of less than a dozen off the top of my head. And that's regular Rebels too. So I think that there's just a whole bunch of money that's been spent on programs that we haven't seen a return on. That is just a huge letdown to the Victorian rugby community. I think that it's showing that Melbourne's rugby team didn't value the Jewish Shield when they said, no, we're not going to send our players there. We're not going to try and strengthen that competition either. We're just going to send them all up to Queensland to play for 2 teams. And it's not even spreading them across Shoot Shield or the Queensland competition anymore. It's just, let's just send them to 2 teams, which is my mate Nick Stiles doing. So, you know, they haven't really valued club rugby, to be honest. Guys aren't getting recruited. What's a player's incentive to play first grade Jewish Shield now? Besides, the obvious reasons of having that drive and that competition. I was never good enough, so I'm not even going to bother put my hand up for it. But that's just a lost incentive, a lost potential to be recruited out of that competition, and even grow that competition to draw players from Queensland and Sydney who might come down here for work to come and play in it. But yeah.
So does it do nothing? Does it really change anything? Does it really, like, it kind of sounds like it won't do anything. Like the competition in Melbourne will continue on, the Dwarf Shield will continue on. Obviously, there's the worry about the pathway into the Melbourne Rebels Super Rugby women's team, which we've talked about has a lot more local talent playing in it and coming through the ranks.
It definitely hurts the women's program. That's for sure. I think it devalues all of us. Like, how many people did I see on Twitter today? Which I know you shouldn't take opinions of arseholes on Twitter, but it's that common phrase of, it was never going to work. It's an AFL state. It's never going to work. And you go, it could have worked. There's over 11,000 registered players here. But when you're not valuing them and you're not respecting them and you're not giving them a product to believe in, why are they going to care? And again, that's not just a Rugby Victoria problem or a Rebels problem. That's a problem across the country. But that's a massive letdown. The community isn't really showing. They say it is, and they love posting their little social media clips, but they've made it a lot harder. Put it that way.
I think for anyone who kind of also looks at that 11,000 number and goes, oh, that's not that many at all. For context as well, I think WA has got 12,000 registered rugby players, and the ACT in Southern New South Wales have 6,500. So, and they've got Super Rugby franchises that are continuing there. So there is, you can still appeal to a large audience with 11,000 registered club players. It does feel like what could have been, in all honesty, when you look at the Rebels.
I think just on that, Nick, that it's not just the devaluing of Victorian rugby, which is the actions of the Melbourne Rebels board, but I think it speaks to a larger problem that we have in Australian rugby of devaluing the clubs. because we're forever seeing the argument, there's not enough depth, not enough talent to have 5 teams. That's why the Wallabies aren't winning. But then we, in the same breath, continuously complain that rugby league stealing all of our talent, and then RA decides to spend 1.6 million on a fucking rugby league winger. When how great are some of these wingers been between Junkyard Dog up in Queensland, Corey Toole, even Jorgensen, Lancaster. There's been so many great wingers, and they're spending 1.6 million on a league winger, but we don't have the depth. But we're losing players to league. It's this conundrum that they've just warped with the perception and taking the piss of Australian fans.
It does. There are so many. It does lead to a broader discussion around how we treat it. And I mean, don't even get me started around the whole situation with DC as well, and the whole situation around how he's been treated, and how that's also reflective of the situation around New South Wales rugby. Bringing it back to this sort of point, kind of here, but because I feel like we could go down a whole other tangent down there. Nathan, there's a bit of more of a kind of direct question. Honest to God, what does this actually mean for all parties going forward? I mean, we're talking Super Rugby 2025. What does this logistic change look like?
I mean, it's a great question. I'm just trying to figure out what the hell it means. I mean, I guess for the start of it, you probably you sort of lose a game in a weekend. You probably go back to another sort of 5 teams, sort of 5 games, 11th team gets the bye type sort of situation, which might make the season flow a bit better. In a sort of it's a terrible way of looking at it, but it's the sort of reality at this point. I mean, the Victorian government probably still going to throw a mozza at trying to get a grand final for a World Cup down there. So I reckon there'll still be big events in terms of Bledisloe Test, in terms of those ones Lions game in 25. I think still be very TBC. The game will be there. It just depends on what sort of team shows up. Will it be an Australia A team? Will it be a international based team, a Pacifica team? Who knows at this stage? But yeah, I it's one of those ones. If you can get, as Dylan said, there's a base of rugby sort of supporters and players there. It's about how do you go about engagement? How do you go doing it properly? How do you go about sort of getting to a stage where you have those, even if it's just half of those 11,000 people sort of come into games and being engaged, and they're bringing people and they're sort of doing it. If you have the right people involved, there's 100% a way back to get a Melbourne team back involved. It's, the whole thing is around the consortium is there was just so much unknown. If you can actually sort of now have the time to be all right, maybe 2025 might not be it, but by the time 27 or 28 comes around, let's put a plan together. Let's actually start to cook something together. Let's find something that's actually financially viable. Because let's face it, the old directors and the old situation absolutely wasn't. Put something together, get sort of something that sort of is based around, and its core is that sort of die-hard Victorian rugby scene that will sort of follow anything that looks like anything clubland, but when it comes to Rebels, just has that disconnect and go from there. There's still so much talent in Victorian rugby that just can't be wasted. For all that's talked about the Storm and their success, Victorian rugby in terms of producing talent compared to rugby league absolutely shits on it. I think there was more Wallabies, Melbourne born and bred Wallabies in the World Cup than have actually played for the Storm in their 25-year career. So, in terms of participation rate, Union kills league in that regard. But it's about how do you now translate to the professional level, and that's what's going to be the next step here. How do you get this to this point?
Could I actually add on to what you're saying, Nathan? I think I could probably say there are more Wallabies or just really good rugby talent coming from Melbourne than, say, Perth. Not that I want to, compare or belittle anyone, but just to big up Melbourne. I can think Leah Lafano, Rob Leota come straight off the top of the head. There's at least one more I'm missing.
You left in Ponne.
Yeah.
Valentini.
Valentini, yeah.
John
and I think is that even bigger than what's coming out of Canberra, as in Canberra talent, born and bred?
Probably not. It'd be pretty close, but Canberra still has a very good.
Yeah, it's pretty close. I think there's at least in the Canberra side. I think there is at least 6 players that right now, obviously, of course, which is very small relative compared to the rest of the squad. But 6 players that have actually come through the ACT and Southern New South Wales pathway.
But paid for the Wallabies?
Not played for the Wallabies, but actually no. Oh,
Lonergan's played for the Wallabies.
Yeah, no. There's a few. Yeah, Lonas has played for the Lonas has played. And I mean, there will definitely be a future Wallaby. I mean, Corey Toole he's a Wagga boy. So
which is in New South Wales. I don't know. It's a talent factory. So, actually, one thing that comes out of this announcement is, and I want to say, I said to you boys before, but that press release that came out is impenetrable. It's unless
Rugby Australia's.
Yeah. Instead of just saying, "Hey, Melbourne won't be in the next Super Rugby. These are the easy reasons why. Here are the detailed reasons." If you want to read on, if you've got a law and if you've got a degree in corporate law or whatever to understand that. But I'm also kind of disappointed that they've been talking about this all year and they haven't figured out, to Dylan's point, what's going to happen with the talent. They didn't say, okay, from now on, they will feed into Canberra, or they will equally feed into Canberra and the Force. So that's really disappointing in that respect as well.
I think they'll figure that out in time. I reckon. So what I think Phil Waugh had said in the press conference earlier today was they were basically exploring 3 scenarios. First being the continuation of the Melbourne Rebels under Rugby Australian guidance, with essentially the current setup as it is now under the alignment program that they have with the TARS. Secondly, the option of giving them over to keep the Rebels continuing under the consortium, and then thirdly, winding up the Rebels entirely, or winding up the Rebels program. Were kind of the 3 options that they explored. And apparently I know that there'd been conversations with a couple of players or several players or all players around where they'd want to go in the event that the Rebels were round up, which is basically the writing on the wall there, which is if you're reading between the lines essentially and you're having those sorts of conversations. So players would probably be like, well, this is how this is going to go. But I mean, it does raise some of those points on. I think it was pretty clear that they were going to have to go for option 3 because option 1 was not sustainable. And just listening to the sort of crap that, I mean, of course, as we all allude to, Rugby Australia is no, is no angel in any sort of stuff when it comes to management of the organization of the whole thing today. But listening to some of the comments that Phil Waugh and Dan Herbert made today, I mean, they didn't even know, it wasn't even clear who was even in the consortium. There were some people in that consortium that they had no idea about, and which I find hilarious. We kind of had talked to the fact that previously the Rebels had always been there was no transparency. They wouldn't speak on particular issues or matters of if back when there was the toss up between them and the Force going, the Rebels said nothing, while the Force were making everything as transparent as possible. And that sort of has continued as this whole stuff has been going around them, apart from 1 or 2 press statements being released. Trying to get answers out of them was so incredibly difficult. And apparently, according to RA, they had a similar issue with the consortium. They were asking for questions and weren't getting any answers. So why would you put your investment in something where you're like, well, what does the rescue plan look like? If you don't know. I think, back to your point, Nick, I reckon we will get answers to that in terms of those pathways. The worst thing they can possibly do now is just...
It's not that we will get answers. They don't have the answers.
Mm.
I'm saying this has been hanging over the neck of the Melbourne Rebels for 4 months, and they haven't figured out a way forward. Now, think about it, your own employment or anyone's employment. If there was something big like this, you would expect the CEO to go, all right, this is what we're thinking, and be very clear and transparent about it. All they've got today is they've cut the Rebels. And they have their reasons for them, and they kind of explain their in the end. But I'm just saying, I'm disappointed. Maybe it's part of this piece of figuring out Australian rugby, that's centralisation, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, yeah, sorry, Nathan.
I was going to say, there could be these plans in place, but you're not going to lay out your entire thing now. I mean, for goodness sake, they only told the players like 8 hours ago this was happening. Like, you can't expect like, here's our 500-point master deck of what's going to happen to every single person, every single sort of player. Like, there'll be plans in place. It's just like, all right, let's just get through telling the players and telling everybody that, hey, this club no longer exists. Like, just like get through that stage first.
So I think this is actually a good key point that we should probably lead on to, which off the back of this, we have the news that's happened here. We have what's going to happen. We've talked about the impact that this is probably going to have on Victorian rugby. Also how the Victorian rugby community, particularly more specifically in kind of that clubland area, will react to it. Really the way forward now is the key question to ask. And I kind of have two questions, and Dylan, I'm going to throw straight to you first on this particular one. First of all, in your eyes, is this the end for the Melbourne Rebels? And then second of all, what is a best case scenario for you in terms of like, if they can come back in any way, shape or form, what does that look like?
Honestly, I don't know, Nick. We don't have a Twiggy Forest. I know the Batuta Advocate said, maybe Gina will get on board if the Rebels take down that the painting of her. But I don't see a magical billionaire coming forth. I've asked my dad to ask his boss, but he doesn't seem too interested in rugby. He's more interested in golf. So I don't see anyone saving them from that financial perspective. I also think there's a lack of trust from this lack of transparency with a consortium, and people aren't going to go, oh yeah, let's give these guys a go when it's the same guys in a different suit. No one wants that, so I don't see them coming back, especially because of that narrative around Victoria doesn't care about rugby. Rugby's a dead marketplace, or Melbourne's a dead marketplace. Like, it's just not. It just needs to be handled differently. I don't know how you bring a professional team back to Melbourne because, we've seen how long it's taken the Force to rebuild, even though they were still around and they had Twiggy's money and Twiggy's competition. We've seen how long it took them to rebuild, and they're only really starting to come good now after recruiting out of the Waratahs and the Brumbies. So I don't know what that looks like. Beyond that, I think the only thing that really saves is if we bring back the NRC, scrap Super Rugby and bring back the NRC. I know you don't like the NRC, Nick, but that might be.
He absolutely hates it.
It's officially confirmed. It's funny. This is the second time I've been bullied about my NRC obsession today. The first one was by my boss at the Raw. He said, "Yeah, Nick, you don't talk about this topic at all."
Yeah, but he doesn't shut up about
Tony
Shield.
You can't be copying that from Tone. Got to fire that back.
Yeah.
Oh, don't worry. We'll in all honesty, we do joke about that sort of stuff. But yeah, I agree. I think until there's only two ways to go realistically if the Rebels do exist. First up, if you are going to do have them in Super Rugby, you've got to build it with direct engagement with the Victorian rugby community. And let's be 100% honest. I remember a point that you said, Dylan, back with our first podcast all the way back in January, and we said that you wouldn't. Yes, when you'd watch that Rebels side play, that yes, they'd be getting flogged week on week, but it would be Victorian players. And that was what was most important.
Well, that's what I think is the reason, I didn't get into it, but when people were talking about it being a failure on Twitter, and I was going, but the reason it's a failure is because people lost the reason to buy into it. And if you're turning up and you're going, oh, this is a guy that I'm playing against, or this is a guy I played with, and then they're walking around and you're not just taking a photo with a celebrity, you're taking photos with your opposition or your teammates, and you're building that presence. And then these guys go from playing If they're not playing on a Friday night, they're back at their local club on a Saturday because they care or they want to give back. They actually believe in the community rugby. And, that's just not there. So I do think, if you wanted to bring it back, my advice to whoever wants to bring it back, that's how you do it. Like, bring in a few guys, but they should want to be playing for Melbourne. It shouldn't be I'd hate to think of how many players that have been playing well in Melbourne, but are playing even better elsewhere. Like, one that jumps to mind is Sione Tuipulotu. Can't get a run in for the Rebels, but can be the vice captain of Scotland and start.
Doesn't that kill?
That blows my mind.
It honestly, yeah.
Like, okay, every country's going to lose players as you go, and they're going to have those moments. But that, to me, is bizarre. And that's not. He's not the first player that's happened to. And you sit there and you go, God, how did he end up being so much better at that side? And I just think, if you had more Victorian boys in that squad, it gives us something to believe in. It gives us something to care about. And then the community will rally around them. I think when the Rebels went, because it's the second time in less than a decade, the community's like, I don't care. And as everyone's pointed out here, trying to get anything from the Rebels is like getting blood from a stone. And that's not fair. That's not how you treat your fans. It's not how, it's all well and good on Twitter. We want to thank all of our fans. But you didn't treat us with the respect and dignity we deserved.
Yeah, kind of bringing it back. If you're going to have them in Super Rugby Pacific, it is sort of a long game. And realistically, with this option, it's 20 years, at least 20 years of investment in the local comp, 20 years of building that talent up. And that growth up, and it would be producing all of its local talent, which is the end game. In the end,
well, I just don't think that's an investment we're going to see, Nick, because I don't think anyone's going to have the patience for it. Because the second that you put together a Victorian team and they get flogged 60-0, everyone's going, oh shit, here we go again. Whereas if they'd done it 10 years ago or 14 years ago, by now they would have built a stronger team. So I don't see it happening.
It's why the only other option is an NRC style comp, where you're not playing in Super Rugby, but you have a either semi-professional or professional side that plays in the latter half after the regular season of the Dwarf Shield ends, and then it serves as a feeder club to somewhere like a Canberra, like a Canberra, like a Western Force, like one of those other franchises, and you build it from there. Nathan, what are your thoughts here? What is the direction forward?
I take the piss out of you for the NRC, but that is the way forward. Like, realistically, if we want to be legitimate about pathways in Melbourne, like, this is what you have to do. You have to keep the team, some presence of the team alive, and it's not going to be in a club competition. It has to be in it has to be in a competition where they test themselves against the best. Keep alive in that. Work towards trying to find some kind of private equity. Not even a private equity, just some investment sort of opportunity where you can sort of convince someone to throw who's comfortable with losing a bit of money to eventually make money. I know, Dylan, you said it's not like Sydney or not like Brisbane, where you have those people who are willing to just throw money and just say, hey, let's see what happens. Like, if you can find the right person and get behind it, do it properly, engage yourself with the Victorian community. That's the way sort of through. It's one of those ones. I know it's where hours after news has been said, and it's tough to say, but it might sound like a crazy statement, but it has to happen sooner rather than later. You have to have someone with some kind of plan or some kind of pathway that can actually just keep it alive. So you're not having to be the force and need two and a bit years to actually get yourself back to being finals contenders or where they were when they sort of got rid of the club. At the same point 8 and 10 years ago.
Well, if Albo wants to wipe my HEX debt, I'm more than happy to try and invest. But until that point, that indexation's killing me.
Oh, God. I know. It couldn't have timed it any worse with the whole announcement of the PNG squad team as well and all the investment there. That's all we need for the Rebels. A bit of soft power. That's what we want. Nick Hartman, kind of as this, this final point for our pod. What are your thoughts on the direction forward for the Rebels? Is this the end for the Rebels? Are they done?
Yeah, I think it is the end. I think if you nuked rugby, like if you pressed restart, would Australian rugby be set up the way it is? No, you wouldn't have all this like feudal system that we have. We have shoot shield with these teams in one half of the city who have an outsized political influence and don't really produce the talent anymore. You have 5 teams spread across the land with all kind of regional and provincial, which is not really a thing, fits geographical patterns apart from, legislative ones. So I'm look, it's hard. I don't know what you do. I think maybe, is it a case of tough decisions have to be made? There'll be many losers out of those tough decisions, but if you compare that to the large morass of Australian rugby fans, lapsed Australian rugby fans, the amount of losers would pale in comparison. So, yeah, look, I don't know. It's a tough one. What do you do unless you start getting the Brumbies games in Melbourne?
It's interesting, Nick, that you just mentioned like the feudalism of it all, because I've been trying to get my head around this idea that we should have tribalism, but it's almost really quite negative across rugby. Like there's almost a hatred of it, and I don't want to do this because it will support that team. And like I look at the Magic Round in the NRL, I know so many guys that travel up to watch that. I don't know anyone that would travel to watch the Super Round in Melbourne, and it's actually a fun weekend. It could be heaps better. I'm not going to write that off, but there really is this, like, it's territorial. It's not this, let's support Australian rugby. It is a massive problem down here in that I know people that go, oh, I'm only going to go if, they'll be Kiwis. I'm only going to go if the Chiefs are playing. And you go, well, why not go? Why don't you want to watch rugby every week? I don't really care about it. It's the same with, oh, no, I'm only going to go because the Tars are here. Like, you should want to go every week. I know that you're not a Rebel supporter. And I think that's a problem here. And I'm not sure if it's a problem. I don't know how often you see away Australian teams turn up in Sydney or in Canberra. But, yeah, you don't see, like, I know people that travel for the AFL, for the NRL, but I don't know people that would travel for the rugby union, and I don't know how we would change that. But I think that mentality also does need to change beyond a tribalism. So,
yeah, I mean, there's lots to unpack there, but I guess kind of to go back to the point of just, it's just the feudal politics, and lots of people want to have their say, and I think that's just kind of bogged us down. We need to move on. We need to be more decisive. Imagine if Twiggy bought Super Rugby out, like how quick would changes be made? How quick? How seamless will the marketing be? All that kind of stuff. But kind of getting away from the point, Nick. But I don't know. It's a tough one, and it's a real. It's not a good situation, not a good setup, and it's tough for Phil Waugh and Dan Herbert to sort out.
The big concern off the back of that, and I think this is a good place to end, is, there's so many people that will say the argument, oh, this will make Australian sides more competitive. Having 4 sides instead of 5. I still have vivid memories of us winning. Our last 2 Super Rugby titles came when we had 5 sides. I'm concerned, that nothing will happen. We have had a better year this year. We have had results, and I think it's more due. While I think it's been off the back of improving sides, I think the Brumbies have been playing very good rugby. I think the Reds have been playing very good rugby, legitimate challengers and contenders to those Kiwi sides. those Kiwi sides are also very much in a process of transition. And what happens if next year they dominate the competition again? And there's only 4 Australian sides, then the argument is no longer about we'll cut them to 3. I refuse to believe that we don't have the depth for 4 sides, because so many players are overseas, so many players have made the jump, so many players are now scattered to the wind and are literally, as you mentioned, Dylan, playing for other countries. I mean, one of the Liner brothers is playing for Italy, Tua Piloto is playing for Scotland, Mac Hansen is playing for Ireland. It's no way is it the case now, from all the investment over the last 20 years, do we not have the depth for at least 4 sides? Then the issue comes down to how those teams are actually run. That is the reality, and the actual infrastructure around them. And it always comes back to that. That is, I think, the reality that faces us. And if that is the case, then that is what has led the Melbourne Rebels down here. Dill.
I just think quickly it's like a tale of 2 cities, really, because yes, the Rebels board has let that team down. There's no denying that. But I think it is part of a much larger systemic issue inside Australian rugby that I'm sure we'll get to go into in more depth in another podcast. But, as I said to you today, Nick, like, grassroots rugby has always been this weaponized thing that we've been hearing all about since 2016, 2017. Oh, it's grassroots. But what does it mean anymore? To me, it's just this, Reagan economics style belief that allows people to, you too one day could be a wallaby, but we need to invest in grassroots. It's the American model of going, you too one could be president despite the fact being unemployed, living in a trailer in the middle of fucking Wyoming. Like, and so when you go on from that, we can't have 5 teams. Okay, we've got 4 teams. We're going to win the Lions series next year. And when we don't win that, it'll be, it's because we've got too many overseas players. Okay, so then it's open slather pick. Okay, when we don't win, it'll be something else. And it's a larger systemic issue throughout Australian rugby that needs to change. And if it doesn't change, it's going to kill the sport. Like, this is a very dark day for Australian rugby, and it really should be the wake-up call to arms for all the young fellas like us and young women too, sorry. But the young people to go, fuck off, boomers. Stop killing this sport and going back to the glory days of 91 and 99. We haven't been good since then, and we've grappled and hung in there, but it's not good enough. And trying to go back to those days, sorry, Nathan, about, just recruiting at a Randwick isn't going to win us a World Cup. And that mentality has to change. And today should be the wake-up call for that.
I feel like this is an appropriate place to end the podcast. And yes, we know that there's round 15 of Super Rugby Pacific that's happening this weekend, and there's all the different little things that we need to consider of who's going to make it and what. But I'll tell you what, something's kind of overshadowed it. It's a huge piece of news that is going to kind of sit, that is kind of gonna, let's be honest here, frankly, hang over the rest of this Super Rugby competition. There will, if the Rebels go through a massive finals campaign, good luck to them. We absolutely, if they do that and this galvanizes them. I know that Kevin Foote literally had a discussion with the players, Nathan, after this. You can probably speak a little bit more on it, but he kind of said to them, look, if this has made you uncomfortable, now's the time to say it, because we literally hop on a plane in an hour, and all of them said we want to keep going and at least try and be part of this story of this club, which honestly I think is extremely commendable. That is hard, adverse circumstances you find yourself in, knowing now that your fate is sealed.
The Rebels have the chance to do the funniest thing possible here and just go in and win a title and be like, all right, sweet, here's our title. All right, we're gone. See you later. It's one of those ones. It's going to hang over them, but hopefully brings the best out of them as they head to Fiji and into the finals, which, again, we'll be back next week to properly talk about the good things that are going on, like the Brumbies potentially getting a top 2 finish and the Reds looking great. But yeah, it's something when something like this happens, you just can't ignore it.
Just a positive to think about that if the Rebels do lose, the Crusaders don't make the finals. So,
That's true.
you know,
Yes.
glass half full here, boys. I'm just, you know, I'm not a complete pessimist.
But if the Rebels lose, the Waratahs also won't make the finals. So
They're gone. They're already out. See you later.
Oh, fuck. I know I can see Dylan's muted himself, but he started shitting himself.
No, I had to take the mic off.
Oh, I reckon that'll wrap us for this episode. But for all of the Rebels players, honest to God, lads, if you are somehow against the odds listening to this podcast, go hard. You got nothing to lose. Go hard. Make sure you go out with a bang, not a whimper. And for any Rebels fans listening, you know, this sucks. You know, if you have been loyal supporters of this club, you know, this is a rough situation to be in. And, you know, we honestly wish you all the best. And, you know, this is a shit situation. There's no other way to put it. So, on that note, hope everyone enjoys their Super Rugby weekend.
worst sign off ever.
I reckon that'll do us.
That was a lot of fun knowing this will be my last podcast because you don't need a rant from a Melbourne Rebels fan anymore.
Yeah, that's how you should have ended it, Nick.
No.
But also goodbye to Dylan. We won't care about your opinion anymore.
Oh, this is all like I'm still recording. This is all still going in. I'm going to drop this in right
from the group chat.
Yeah. Fuck off, non-Sydney, New South Wales.
The only way you get back in is joining Randwick. That's it.
No,
that ain't fucking happening.